Sabrina Lennox never imagined that coming home 2 hours early on a Tuesday afternoon would completely change her life. As she walked down the quiet hallway of her Beverly Hills mansion, an unexpected sound made her stop. It was laughter. Real laughter. Bright and full of life. Coming from Julian's room. Her 6-year-old son, who she thought had forgotten how to smile for months. Julian was born with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a rare disease that gradually took away his ability to move. Ever since being diagnosed at the age of 4, the boy had relied on a wheelchair and various support devices. Every time she saw him struggle to move his small legs, Sabrina felt her heart shatter into pieces. And instead of facing that pain, she buried herself in work. Endless meetings, multi-billion-dollar deals. As if non-stop working could numb the helplessness of a mother who couldn't save her own child. That lingering guilt slowly ate her away, turning Sabrina Lennox into the cold, untouchable woman the financial world revered, while her own son had become a stranger to her. Approaching the half-closed door, Sabrina peeked through the crack, and the blood in her veins froze. Elliot Hayes, the janitor she had hired 6 months ago, was kneeling beside Julian. But what made her heart stop wasn't the sight itself. It was what he was doing. Elliot was gently supporting the boy's frail legs, guiding Julian through each movement with the precision of a professional physical therapist. The boy giggled as Elliot encouraged him with a soft humming tune, singing and counting the rhythm. Those rough hands, calloused from cleaning, moved with astonishing skill, precise, tender, and confident, more so than even the top therapists Sabrina had paid thousands of dollars per session. "Come on, little man," Elliot whispered. "Remember what we talked about yesterday? You're a brave warrior." Julian took a deep breath, gathered all his strength, and lifted his trembling legs a few inches off the ground. His eyes lit up. Elliot smiled and clapped softly. "That's it! You're getting stronger every day." Julian and Sabrina stood frozen, overwhelmed by a storm of emotions. Anger that an employee had dared to interfere with her son's treatment. Confusion at seeing her child's sudden progress in just a few minutes. And heartbreak as she realized the person who could make Julian laugh wasn't her. Perhaps, deep down, there was also jealousy. The kind she didn't even dare admit to herself. But there was something else. Elliot spoke to Julian using precise medical terminology, referencing muscle groups, tension points, extension techniques, so naturally that it sent chills down Sabrina's spine. How could an ordinary janitor understand the human body with such expertise? That mystery clung to her mind, refusing to let go. And if you're curious about who this seemingly simple man really is, and how he would turn Sabrina's entire world upside down, don't forget to subscribe and follow the next chapter. Because one small act from Elliot that night would completely shatter the life of billionaire Sabrina Lennox. Elliot Hayes, 34, came from a small village in Oregon. His tousled brown hair, deep blue eyes tinged with sorrow, and rare but warm smile felt like early winter sunlight. His hands were calloused, his back slightly stooped, traces of years spent doing hard labor. 6 months ago, when Sabrina Lennox interviewed him through a staffing agency, the first thing that caught her attention was his gaze. Honest, calm, unpretentious. He simply said, "I need this job to support my daughter." "I'll work hard." Sabrina didn't hire him because of a polished resume. In fact, his file was so bare, it looked almost empty. But because of a quiet instinct that told her this man could be trusted. Over the past 6 months, Elliot proved that instinct right every single day. He arrived an hour early each morning, never once asked for overtime pay. His work was meticulous, careful, and he never complained. But what Sabrina didn't know was this. Each night, after finishing his shift at the Lennox mansion, Elliot took 2 buses back to a tiny apartment in Burbank, where he lived with his 8-year-old daughter, Nora. Nora had her father's blue eyes and blonde hair, usually braided into 2 neat pigtails. Her smile was radiant, but her gaze was older than her years, the eyes of a child who had already seen too much loss. 2 years earlier, Nora's mother, Elena, had died from late-stage breast cancer. Before her death, they had spent every cent of their savings on treatment, leaving Elliot with crushing medical debt and a 6-year-old girl traumatized by grief. Nora was not like other children. She was on the autism spectrum, which made communication difficult. After her mother, the one person who truly understood her emotional language, passed away, Nora nearly stopped speaking. She expressed herself through drawings, and Elliot learned to understand her through every line and color. He had no choice but to become both father and mother. Elliot read books, watched videos, and joined online support groups to learn how to care for a child with autism. He learned when Nora needed silence, when she needed a hug, and how to turn her meltdowns into moments of connection. Every morning, he woke up at 5, made breakfast, took Nora to school, then caught the bus to Beverly Hills. At night, no matter how exhausted he was, he sat beside her, drawing, talking about her mother, and learning together how to live on. What Sabrina never imagined was that the quiet man she'd hired carried a past he had tried to bury. A past that might explain why he knew complex physical therapy techniques so well. Sabrina Lennox, 42, was the CEO of Lennox Innovations, a $2 billion tech conglomerate in Silicon Beach, Los Angeles. She had sleek black hair, cold gray eyes, and the poise of a woman who could control everything, except her own emotions. Born into a middle-class family in San Francisco, Sabrina had worked relentlessly to reach the top. But every success came with a price. Her marriage to renowned architect Landon Lennox crumbled after their son, Julian, was diagnosed with a severe genetic disease. Unable to bear the pressure and Sabrina's endless work hours, Landon left 2 years ago for New York. He sent regular child support, but never called or visited. Julian slowly forgot his father's voice. To him, his dad became nothing more than a distant name. Since then, Sabrina turned herself into a fortress. She buried her feelings under work, spending 14 to 16 hours a day at the office. She hired the best medical teams, bought the most advanced therapy equipment, yet rarely stayed home long enough to spend a full afternoon with her son. Guilt clung to her like a shadow. Every time she saw Julian in his wheelchair, she wondered, was it my fault? Did I do something wrong during pregnancy? Though doctors assured her that Duchenne muscular dystrophy was caused by a spontaneous genetic mutation, that no one was to blame, logic could never quiet the storm inside her. So she distanced herself from her own child, and the further she pulled away, the more she lost connection, trust, and the tender bond of motherhood. Julian Lennox, 6, had curly blonde hair, bright green eyes, and a rare smile that could light up an entire room. He was born healthy and energetic, but soon after his 4th birthday, strange signs began: constant falls, trouble standing, growing weakness each day. The test results were a verdict: Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a rare genetic disorder that weakens muscles until movement becomes impossible. There is no cure. The average life expectancy, 20 to 30 years. From that moment, Julian's life revolved around therapy sessions, tests, and tears. He relied on a wheelchair, leg braces, and help for even the simplest tasks. But the pain that hurt most was loneliness. His father was gone. His mother was never home. And his classmates didn't know how to play with the special boy. Julian, once a curious explorer, had turned quiet, withdrawn, and shut himself off from the world. Until the day Elliot Hayes walked into his life. A man who seemed to come only to mop floors, yet brought with him something no doctor or expensive treatment ever could: hope. That Wednesday morning, Sabrina couldn't focus on a single meeting. Charts, reports, numbers, all of it blurred into meaningless noise. The image of Elliot and Julian in that room replayed in her mind like a film stuck on an endless loop. By the afternoon, Sabrina made a decision. She would go home early. This time, not out of curiosity, but because she needed to confront it. She had to know exactly what was happening inside her own house, and inside her son's life. When she stepped into the kitchen, she found Elliot preparing a snack for Julian. "Elliot, I need to talk to you." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were cold as steel. "About yesterday, in Julian's room." Elliot froze mid-motion, a knife still in his hand, slicing fruit. His shoulders tensed, but his voice remained steady. "Mrs. Lennox, I can explain." "Explain?" Sabrina tilted her head, her gaze sharp as a blade. "You were playing doctor with my son without my permission? You're not trained for that. You're just a janitor." Elliot lowered his head. His hands trembled slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to overstep." Though his tone was humble, Sabrina sensed something beneath the surface, a quiet conviction, as if behind that calm exterior lay a truth powerful enough to change everything if spoken aloud. "Where did you learn those techniques?" she pressed, her voice now lower, but even sharper. "How does a janitor know anything about physical therapy?" Elliot stayed silent for a long time, his fingers clasped tightly together. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but sincere. "My daughter, Nora. She was born with autism and developmental motor issues. My wife, Elena, was a therapist. Before she died of cancer, she taught me everything she knew, for 6 years, so I could care for our daughter myself. We couldn't afford expensive therapy sessions, so I had to learn. I became my daughter's own therapist." When Elliot looked up, Sabrina saw, for the first time, the fire behind his calm blue eyes. Fierce, resilient, heartbreakingly genuine. Nora is 8 now. She still struggles to communicate, but she's learned to regulate her emotions, to talk with friends, and most importantly, she's learned to believe in herself. Doctors once said she'd never manage in a regular classroom, but today she's in 2nd grade, helping other kids. The words hit Sabrina like a current of electricity. The anger that had been simmering in her chest suddenly ebbed, replaced by something else: admiration, tinged with shame. This man, with his rough hands and humble life, had achieved something she, a woman who had the world at her feet, could not. He had healed a child through love. "You had no right to make decisions about my son's treatment without my consent," Sabrina said, though her voice had softened noticeably. "You're right," Elliot nodded, eyes lowered. "But Julian was sad. He'd lost all motivation. I just wanted to help." At that moment, a small voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Mom, you're home early?" Julian appeared, sitting in his wheelchair, his eyes bright. Sabrina turned around, and her heart clenched. Julian was sitting up straighter than before, his shoulders no longer slumped. He looked confident, radiant. In his eyes she saw something she thought was gone forever: light. "Julian, go to your room. The adults are talking." The words came out instinctively, cold, rigid, unfeeling. The boy's smile flickered and vanished like a candle snuffed out. Elliot quickly knelt to meet Julian's gaze and said gently, "Why don't you wait for me in the living room? I'll teach you a new exercise in a few minutes." Julian nodded and wheeled himself away. Silence filled the kitchen once again. Elliot looked straight at Sabrina. His tone was calm, but his eyes were unwavering. "Mrs. Lennox, I know you see me as just a janitor. Maybe that's true. But your son is improving. And you know it." "Improving?" Sabrina gave a dry laugh. "You've only been around him for a short while." "No, ma'am," Elliot replied, his voice suddenly firm. "I've watched Julian every day for 6 months. I've seen him cry because he thinks no one cares. I've seen him push himself just so he wouldn't disappoint the professionals you hired. I've seen a boy who's smart, brave, and just needs someone, anyone, to truly believe in him." Elliot's words rang in Sabrina's ears like church bells. When was the last time she had truly seen her son? Not his illness, not his condition, but him? "My methods may not be as scientific as the experts," Elliot continued, his voice deep but warm, "but they're built on love. And sometimes, that alone can make the difference." Sabrina stood frozen. Her emotions churned violently. Part of her wanted to reject everything he'd said. Her pride as a powerful woman refused to accept that a janitor could do what her elite medical team could not. But another part, the mother buried deep inside, couldn't deny the truth shining before her eyes. Julian really was changing. Still, one thought wouldn't leave her mind. How could Elliot pour so much time, so much energy into her son after working exhausting hours every day? What drove this man, someone who had already lost everything, to keep giving so much? That question would soon lead Sabrina to a discovery, one that would forever change the way she saw Elliot Hayes. In the days that followed, Sabrina Lennox began watching Elliot with different eyes. He was no longer just the quiet janitor moving through her house. He was an unknown, a mystery she couldn't stop thinking about. She needed to know who he really was. Sabrina quietly installed extra security cameras throughout the mansion. The official reason? To improve safety for Julian. The real reason? To observe Elliot's every move. What she saw in the recordings left her completely confused, though not in the way she had expected. The first thing she discovered was that Elliot arrived an hour early every morning, and never once asked for overtime pay. He stayed after hours just to help Julian practice small mobility exercises. On weekends, while everyone else rested, he came back voluntarily to continue their sessions at home. No one paid him to do any of it. Days later, Sabrina was stunned to find that Elliot had ingeniously transformed her son's room into a homemade therapy space. Pillows were arranged as balance obstacles. Old clothing elastic bands became resistance tools. Plastic bottles filled with sand turned into miniature dumbbells. Every ordinary household object in the multi-million-dollar mansion had been turned into makeshift rehabilitation equipment, used with care and precision. One afternoon, Sabrina found a thick notebook in Elliot's handwriting. Inside, he had documented every detail of Julian's progress. Which exercises worked best? The boy's emotional reactions to each session. Tiny milestones. Julian held his balance for 3 seconds. Julian lifted his left arm on his own 5 times. Each line brimmed with patience, compassion, and unwavering belief. It was more heartfelt and more human than any professional report Sabrina had ever seen. One afternoon, unable to resist her curiosity any longer, Sabrina decided to follow Elliot after work. She wanted to see how a man who gave so much of himself to her son lived when no one was watching. From afar, she saw Elliot leaving the gated community, taking 2 consecutive buses to a modest neighborhood in Burbank. He entered a small house with a neglected yard and peeling fence paint. About an hour later, he came out with a little blonde girl, around 8 years old. She walked a few steps behind him, not holding his hand, eyes fixed on the ground, shy and withdrawn. Sabrina recognized her immediately. Nora, the daughter he'd mentioned. They walked to a nearby park. Elliot spread out a small blanket on the grass and took out a box of colored pencils. Nora sat down and began to draw in silence. Elliot didn't say much. He simply sat beside her, occasionally commenting in a gentle voice, "That shade of blue is beautiful, Nora." "That's the sky, right?" Nora nodded slightly without replying. Half an hour passed. A little boy from the park ran over, curious about her drawing. Nora instantly shrank back, covering her sketch with both hands. Elliot placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Nora, the boy just wants to see your drawing. You can say no if you don't want to, but you can also try showing him if you're ready." Nora looked up at her father, hesitated, then slowly lowered her hands. The boy smiled. "It's beautiful." Then he ran off. Nora lifted her head, her eyes sparkling with pride. Elliot smiled and pulled her into a hug. "You did amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." From a distance, Sabrina stood frozen. This was no ordinary father. This was a man who understood every breath, every flicker of emotion in his child, who knew when to speak, when to stay silent, and how to nurture a soul that needed gentleness more than words. While Nora continued drawing, Sabrina approached. Elliot sat on a stone bench, eyes fixed tenderly on his daughter. When he noticed her, he startled and stood up quickly. "Mrs. Lennox? What? What are you doing here?" "I want to know why you care so much about Julian," Sabrina said bluntly. Elliot looked uneasy, clearly unsettled by being followed. I don't know what you want me to say." "The truth," Sabrina replied, her tone sharp as glass. "A regular janitor doesn't spend hours every day with his employer's son." "So what is it you want from me?" Elliot fell silent for a long moment. His gaze lingered on Nora, who was carefully adding color to her drawing. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "My daughter isn't just my responsibility, Mrs. Lennox. She's my reason to live." When the doctors said she'd never be able to communicate like other children, I promised myself I'd prove them wrong. "And did you?" Sabrina asked, her voice softer now. "Yes," Elliot nodded. "Not because of therapy exercises, but because I never stopped believing in her. I never let her think she was weak or broken." Then he looked directly into Sabrina's eyes, his tone calm but filled with quiet power. "And when I look at Julian, I see the same thing. A child full of potential, surrounded by adults who, without realizing it, have already given up on him." The words cut into Sabrina like a blade. "Are you saying I gave up on my son?" she snapped, her voice trembling with wounded pride. Elliot shook his head. "I'm not blaming anyone, ma'am. I'm saying Julian needs someone who believes in the impossible." At that moment, Nora stood up and ran over, holding up her new drawing. "Daddy, I finished!" Elliot crouched down, smiling as he took it. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. This is our family, isn't it?" Nora nodded, then pointed to each figure with her tiny finger. "That's you. That's me. And that's Mommy. She's watching us from heaven." Elliot pulled her close, holding her tightly. His shoulders trembled, but he forced a smile, refusing to let the tears fall. Sabrina turned away, her heart sinking. She didn't want to intrude on such a sacred moment, but in that instant, she understood everything. Elliot Hayes wasn't just helping Julian move again, he was continuing the legacy of his late wife, a woman who had dedicated her life to healing forgotten children. And through that act of love, he was still healing himself. Yet one mystery still kept Sabrina Lennox awake at night. In the camera footage, she noticed something strange. On several occasions, Elliot left the mansion very late, almost 10 p.m., always carrying the same old black canvas bag. Where was he going at that hour? And what was inside that bag? A week later, Sabrina decided to find out for herself. On Thursday night, close to 10 o'clock, Elliot left the estate as usual, the familiar black bag slung over his shoulder. Sabrina quietly followed in her car, keeping a safe distance. Elliot took 2 bus transfers, heading east toward Los Angeles. Finally, he stopped in front of a worn-down building with peeling paint and a faded wooden sign that read, St. Mary Community Center, Special Children's Support Program. Through the dusty window, Sabrina squinted, and what she saw made her forget to breathe. Elliot stood in the middle of a small, modest room, dimly lit by a few flickering fluorescent bulbs. Around him were more than a dozen children, each with their own battle. A boy in a wheelchair, his legs strapped in braces. A girl on crutches, taking slow, trembling steps. A child with Down syndrome stacking colored blocks. A few kids on the autism spectrum, just like Nora. Elliot, the man she once thought could only hold a broom and a mop, now stood at the heart of the room, guiding each child's movement, each breath. He spoke softly, patiently, with a touch of humor. The mystery bag was filled not with valuables, but with homemade therapy tools, elastic bands, soft balls, sand-filled bottles, foam cushions, even wooden spoons turned into reflex trainers. The children called him by one name, Teacher Elliot. Sabrina quietly pushed the door open and stepped inside, keeping to the corner. No one noticed her. A little girl named Maria, about 7, was trying to walk with leg braces. Elliot knelt beside her, his voice full of encouragement. Come on, Maria. Let's try 5 steps today, okay? Just 5. Maria pressed her lips together and nodded. Step by trembling step. 1, 2, 3. By the 5th, she burst into laughter, her face shining like sunlight. Elliot clapped his hands, his smile radiant. That's wonderful, Maria. Next week, we'll try 7. In another corner, David, a 9-year-old with Down syndrome, was carefully sorting colored blocks. Elliot watched him closely. Red goes with red, remember? You've got this. Buddy David tried, failed, and tried again, until finally the blocks matched perfectly. He shouted with joy. Elliot laughed and gave him a high five. Nearby, an exhausted older woman wiped away tears. When Elliot passed by, she caught his hand. Teacher Elliot, thank you. For 6 months, Maria hasn't smiled since the accident. And tonight, she did. You gave me my daughter back. Elliot smiled gently, his voice catching. Maria's brave, Mrs. Rodriguez. She's the one healing herself. From the corner, Sabrina felt her chest tighten. The man before her wasn't just teaching these children to move. He was teaching them to believe they deserved to live fully. When the session ended, parents gradually led their children home. Elliot stayed behind, cleaning the space and packing his tools. When he turned around, he froze. Sabrina was standing in the doorway. Mrs. Lennox, I saw everything, she said calmly, stepping inside. Her eyes swept the room, the cracked wooden floor, the peeling walls, the chipped plastic chairs. Yet the air felt warm, full of purpose and care. You do this every night? Not every night, Elliot replied quietly. Just 3 evenings a week. I spend the rest with Nora, And you don't get paid? No grants? No support? No, ma'am. It's volunteer work. Sabrina fell silent. Her throat tightened. Here was a man who took 2 buses each way, worked all day, raised a daughter alone, and still found the strength and compassion to help strangers' children. "Why, Elliot?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "Why do you do all this?" Elliot sat down on an old chair, his hands clasped together. There was fatigue in his tone, pain, but also a quiet, unshakable light. "Because when my wife, Elena, was alive, she devoted her life to children like these. She was an occupational therapist. She didn't do it for money. She did it because she believed every child deserves a chance." He looked up, his blue eyes glistening. "When she died, I promised myself I'd continue her work. I don't have her degrees or her clinic, but I have these hands and this heart. And sometimes that's enough." Sabrina stood frozen, unable to speak. It felt as though someone had struck her straight in the chest. This was what true nobility looked like. It wasn't in money or power or prestige, but in the ability to give without expecting recognition. "Do you know you deserve far more than this?" Sabrina's voice softened. "You deserve acknowledgement. You deserve to be paid." Elliot simply smiled and shook his head. "I'm not doing it to be recognized, Mrs. Lennox. I do it because these kids need me." The words hung in the air, simple, unadorned, and utterly real. And in that tiny, run-down community center, they echoed like a sermon. For the first time in her life, Sabrina Lennox, the woman who once believed she had everything, realized there are things in this world money will never be able to buy. The next morning, Sabrina Lennox sat in her glass-walled office, staring out at the awakening skyline of Los Angeles. Yet her mind refused to settle. The numbers on her screen blurred, replaced by the faces of the children from St. Mary's Community Center. Maria's radiant smile, David's proud eyes, Mrs. Rodriguez's tears of gratitude, and above all, Elliot's image. The man she once dismissed as just a janitor had turned out to be a quiet hero, transforming the lives of dozens of children with nothing more than his hands and a heart full of kindness. But this time, Sabrina didn't want to understand him through camera lenses or secret notes. She needed to hear the truth from him, directly. That evening, Sabrina asked Elliot to stay after his shift. They sat across from each other in the grand living room, warm light flickering on the crystal wine glass in her hand, while Elliot held a plain cup of black coffee. "Elliot," she began, calm but serious, "I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Do you have any formal qualifications in therapy?" Elliot was silent for a few seconds, then exhaled softly, like a man preparing to set down a weight he had carried for years. "Yes, ma'am," he said slowly. "I hold a bachelor's degree in occupational therapy from Cal State Los Angeles. I graduated 5 years ago on a full scholarship, working night shifts to make ends meet." Sabrina froze, speechless. "You mean you're a trained therapist?" She leaned forward, incredulous. "Then why on earth are you working as a janitor?" A faint, weary smile crossed Elliot's face, the kind worn by people who've learned to accept life's injustices. "Because no one wanted to hire a single father with no clinical experience as a pediatric therapist in private hospitals," he said quietly. "I sent out 63 applications, clinics, hospitals, rehabilitation centers all over Los Angeles. Every answer was the same. We're looking for someone with experience in high-end environments. Some even told me outright, our clients are more comfortable working with female therapists." Sabrina clenched her jaw, fury flaring in her eyes. "That's blatant sexism." "It is," Elliot nodded, his voice calm but tired. "But I couldn't afford a lawyer. I had a daughter to raise, and a mountain of medical debt from Elena's cancer treatments. So I took any job that could keep food on the table." It was the first time Sabrina had heard Elliot's full story. The story of a father, a husband, and a man who had sacrificed everything for love and responsibility. Elliot told her that he and Elena met in college. She was a senior, he a sophomore. They fell in love, married young, and welcomed Nora before either had found stable footing in life. When Nora was diagnosed with autism at 2 years old, Elena left her job at an elite clinic to care for her full-time. Elliot, facing mounting expenses, dropped out of college and worked full-time. Construction, night shifts, whatever paid. But he never gave up his dream completely. At night, he studied online, took free courses, read every medical book he could find. After 4 years, he earned his degree. The very year Nora turned 6. 2 months later, Elena was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. A year of desperate treatment consumed everything: money, strength, hope. When she died, Nora was only 6 years old. Elliot's voice faltered. "After Elena passed, I tried to re-enter the field. But no one would hire me. They said I lacked hands-on experience, and I needed flexible hours to care for Nora, something private clinics would never allow." He looked directly at Sabrina, his eyes weary yet unwavering. "Eventually, I realized I had to choose my career or my daughter, and I chose her." Silence filled the room. Heavy, almost sacred. For the first time, Sabrina saw him not through the eyes of an employer, measured by status, title, income, but as a man who had given up everything for love, compassion, and duty. "How did you find St. Mary's Community Center?" Sabrina asked softly. Elliot gave a modest smile. "I didn't find it," he said. "I built it." Sabrina blinked, taken aback. Elliot explained. A year earlier, he had returned to St. Mary's Church in East L.A., where he and Elena had once volunteered. He asked the parish priest for permission to use a small, unused back room to hold free exercise and mobility sessions for children with special needs. It began with just 3 kids, the children of neighbors and a few single mothers who couldn't afford therapy. Word spread quickly. 3 became 5, then 12, then 15. "Because I don't have an official therapy license, not enough clinical hours, I can't open a private practice," Elliot said. "But I can still teach movement and coordination exercises as a volunteer. It's the only legal loophole that lets me keep helping these kids." Sabrina nodded slowly, the puzzle pieces finally falling into place. "And when you met Julian?" "I saw Nora in him. And Elena," Elliot replied, his voice quiet. "A child who needed someone to believe in him. I know I should have asked for your permission first, but I was afraid you'd say no. And Julian needed help now, not after the paperwork." Sabrina didn't respond. She just looked at him, her expression softening, burdened with thought. "So," she asked gently, "everything you've done for Julian was real therapy?" "Yes," Elliot said firmly. "Every technique I used is evidence-based. The only thing I added," he paused, smiling faintly, "is something many professionals forget." "And what's that?" Sabrina asked. "Love," he whispered. And in that moment, Sabrina Lennox, the woman who once believed money could solve anything, finally understood. Some miracles aren't bought. They're built, quietly, persistently, by hearts that refuse to stop caring. That night, Sabrina Lennox couldn't sleep. She lay still in the dark, the faint glow of the streetlights slipping through the curtains and painting pale streaks across the ceiling. Every word Elliot had spoken replayed in her mind. The story of Elena, of Nora, of the children at St. Mary's Community Center, and for the first time in years, she faced herself. For so long, Sabrina had lived by false values. She believed money, power, and status defined a person's worth. But Elliot, a janitor, had made her see that true greatness was found in the ability to give without expecting anything in return. The next morning, Sabrina woke with a decision that would alter both their lives forever. That morning, she called Elliot into her home office. The elegant room lined with books, bathed in warm light, overlooking the lush green garden. "Elliot, please, have a seat," she said, her tone calm but softer than usual. Elliot hesitated, sat down, his hands clasped tightly, a quiet tension in his eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation yesterday," Sabrina began, "and I realized I made a terrible mistake." Elliot swallowed hard, waiting. "My mistake," she said slowly, "wasn't hiring you. It was not seeing you, the real you, from the very beginning." She slid an envelope across the desk. "This is your new contract," Sabrina said. "I want you to become Julian's official private therapist. Your salary will be 6 times your current pay, full medical insurance for you and Nora, and flexible hours so you can still take care of your daughter." Elliot opened the envelope, his eyes trembling. "Mrs. Lennox, I don't know what to say." "Then let me finish," Sabrina smiled faintly. "I'm also funding a full renovation of the St. Mary's Community Center. You'll get new equipment, a professional team, and a permanent operating budget. I want you to lead it, as medical director, with full control over the program." Elliot froze. Tears filled his eyes and began to fall silently. "Mrs. Lennox, I can't accept this. It's too much. Too generous." "No, Elliot." Sabrina leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. "You can, and you will. This isn't charity. It's justice. You deserve recognition, not just for Julian, but for every child whose life you've changed." She paused, her voice softening. "And one more thing. I'll fund a full scholarship for you to earn your master's in pediatric therapy at USC. It's a flexible program. You'll still be able to care for Nora and continue your work." Elliot lowered his head, covering his face with both hands. He began to cry, not from sadness, but from release. The tears of a man who had endured too much and was finally seen. For years he had buried this dream, and now someone had just handed it back to him. But Sabrina knew the final decision didn't belong to her. It belonged to Julian. She called her son into the office. The little boy rolled in on his wheelchair, his cheeks rosy, his eyes bright. Sabrina knelt down, meeting him at eye level. "Julian, sweetheart, I have something important to ask you. Would you like Mr. Elliot to become your official therapist? That means he won't be cleaning anymore. He'll be here just to help you train." Julian's eyes widened, sparkling as if Christmas had arrived early. "Really, Mom? Elliot will be here more?" "Yes, honey. He will." Julian turned to Elliot, his smile wide and genuine, the kind of smile Sabrina hadn't seen in years. "Elliot, that means you're not leaving me, right?" Elliot knelt down and wrapped him in a hug. "I'm not going anywhere, little man. I promise." Julian squeezed his neck and whispered, "You're like the dad I never had." Sabrina froze. A sharp ache bloomed in her chest, not because the boy was wrong, but because he was right. She realized then that her son's struggle wasn't just about muscles or movement. It was about connection, about the absence of someone who believed in him, stood by him, loved him without condition. 3 weeks later, the miracle no one dared to hope for finally happened. That morning, Sabrina was in her downstairs office when she heard a panicked, excited voice. "Mom! Mom! Come quick!" Her heart skipped. She ran out and froze in the doorway. Julian was standing. No wheelchair, no braces, no hands supporting him. He was standing, trembling but upright. Elliot knelt in front of him, arms open just in case. "Mom, look!" Julian cried, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'm standing!" Sabrina covered her mouth, tears flooding her eyes. She took a slow step forward, afraid that even a breath might break the fragile magic of that moment. "You did it, Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My brave boy." Julian took a deep breath, eyes bright with determination. "I'm going to walk now, Mom." Elliot says, "I'm ready." "Slowly, little man," Elliot said softly. "Remember what I taught you. Small steps, deep breaths, trust your legs." Julian nodded. 1, 2, 3. He lifted his right foot, moved it forward a few inches, then the left. The whole room held its breath. 3 steps. He took 3 full steps before his legs gave way, and he began to fall. But Elliot caught him in time. Julian clung to him, breathing hard, eyes shining. "I did it!" 3 steps, Elliot. "I did it." Elliot's voice broke as he smiled through tears. "I'm proud of you, Julian." So proud. Sabrina dropped to her knees, wrapping them both in her arms, sobbing openly. "My son, you're incredible." For the first time in years, hope filled her heart. Not the sterile kind doctors spoke of, but real hope. The kind born from faith, love, and resilience. And she knew, without a doubt, that the miracle standing before her wasn't the work of money, machines, or medicine. It was born from one ordinary man, a man whose hands could clean a floor or lift a child, and whose heart had never stopped believing in healing through love. Every beautiful story must pass through its own storm. 1 month after Elliot Hayes officially became Julian's therapist, challenges began to strike. Relentless, fierce, and without warning. During Julian's routine follow-up, Dr. Richard Preston, the top pediatric neurologist who had overseen Julian's case since the beginning, examined the latest results with a furrowed brow. "Mrs. Lennox," he said slowly, "I'm seeing some unusual improvements in Julian." "What do you mean?" Sabrina asked, her heart pounding. "Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a progressive disease," he replied. "In theory, the muscles weaken over time. They don't get stronger." "It could be because of the intensive therapy," Sabrina said quickly, clinging to hope. Dr. Preston nodded faintly, but his gaze sharpened. "Or, the initial diagnosis was wrong. I want to reevaluate everything." Sabrina froze. If the diagnosis had been wrong, then were all of Elliot's efforts in vain? Or had he discovered something modern medicine had yet to understand? But the conversation didn't end there. When Julian left the room, Dr. Preston held Sabrina back. "Mrs. Lennox," he lowered his voice, "I've heard that you hired someone without a valid clinical license to treat your son." Sabrina stiffened. "Elliot has a bachelor's degree in occupational therapy." "But no clinical license," he interrupted, eyes sharp. "Legally, he is not authorized to practice therapy. If any complications arise, the consequences could be severe. Not only for him, but for you as well." The words hit Sabrina like a weight pressed against her chest. For the first time, she questioned herself. Had she trusted too blindly? Had love for her son blinded her judgment as a mother? Then came the real test, not through words, but through pain. It was a Thursday afternoon. Elliot and Julian were practicing in the therapy room when Sabrina heard a sudden scream. "Ah! My legs! They hurt!" She raced down the stairs, her pulse pounding. Julian lay sprawled on the floor, his face twisted in pain, legs cramped and trembling. Elliot knelt beside him, trying to stay calm. "Julian, tell me, where does it hurt?" "My legs. They hurt so much," the boy sobbed. "What happened here?" Sabrina shouted as she burst into the room. Elliot looked up, worry written all over his face, though his voice stayed steady. "I think it's a muscle strain. We tried a new exercise. I may have pushed him too hard." "Pushed him too hard?" Sabrina's voice cracked, fear giving way to anger. "What on earth are you doing to my son?" "I'm sorry," Elliot said softly, guilt in his eyes. "I misjudged his strength today." Sabrina called for an ambulance. While waiting, she stood silently in the corner, not saying a word, not looking at him. Just hours ago, the distance between them had felt like trust. Now, it was a chasm colder than fear itself. At the hospital, the diagnosis was clear: severe muscle strain in both legs. Julian would need complete rest for at least 2 weeks. Dr. Preston visited later, his face cold and stern. "This is exactly what I warned you about, Mrs. Lennox," he said, his tone edged with reproach. "Unsupervised therapy can cause more harm than good." Sabrina sat beside Julian's hospital bed, holding his small, sleeping hand. Guilt ate away at her like rust. Had she been wrong? Had her trust led her son into pain? That evening, Elliot came to the hospital, holding a small bouquet and a paper crane that Nora had folded for Julian. But as he reached the door, Sabrina was already standing there, composed, silent, unmovable. "I think you should go home," she said quietly, but firmly. "Mrs. Lennox, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" She cut him off, her voice trembling but sharp. "That you hurt my son? That I was foolish enough to trust you?" Elliot's eyes darkened with pain. "I would never hurt Julian," he whispered. "That boy means—" "You're not my son's doctor, Elliot," Sabrina interrupted, her voice low, shaking. "Maybe I forgot that." The words fell between them like a blade, cutting through the fragile bond they had built. Elliot stood still for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just turned away and walked down the long, sterile corridor, his footsteps echoing beneath the cold fluorescent lights until they faded into silence. And inside the room, Sabrina Lennox sat alone beside her sleeping son, listening to the steady beeping of the heart monitor, the only sound left in a night where hope itself seemed to be slipping away. The following 2 weeks were the darkest of Sabrina Lennox's life. The once lively mansion was now so silent she could hear the wind slide past the window panes. Julian remained in the hospital, quiet, withdrawn, distant. He asked about Elliot almost every day. Sabrina avoided the question each time, saying Elliot was busy, or that he'd be back soon. But he didn't come. Sabrina had given him a temporary leave to reassess the situation. Then something strange happened. Without Elliot, Julian stopped improving. In fact, he began to regress. The new team of therapists Sabrina hired followed every textbook protocol, yet Julian refused to engage. He stayed silent, avoided their eyes, and spent most of his time staring blankly out the window. One night, as Sabrina sat beside his bed, Julian's small voice broke the stillness, faint but clear. "Mom, do you hate Mr. Elliot?" The question struck her like lightning. "No, sweetheart. Of course I don't. Then why isn't he coming back?" Tears rolled down his cheeks. "I miss him." Sabrina took his hand gently. "He made you hurt, Julian. Mommy just wants you to be safe." "It wasn't his fault," Julian cried out. "I wanted to impress him." "I tried too hard. It's my fault. Sabrina pulled him into her arms, guilt tightening around her chest like a vice. Through his sobs, Julian whispered, I love Mr. Elliot. He's the only one who really believes I can do things. Not like the doctors. Not like you. The last words pierced her like a blade. She stayed silent. Because he was right. Deep down, Sabrina had never truly believed her son could beat the disease. She had accepted it as an irreversible sentence. But Elliot hadn't. He believed, even when no one else dared to, even when she didn't. The next morning, Sabrina called Dr. Richard Preston and asked to meet privately. Doctor, she began as they sat in his office, I need the truth. Was my son really improving before the strain, or was it all just in my head? Dr. Preston sighed, removed his glasses, and opened Julian's thick medical file. Mrs. Lennox, I have to admit something. Comparing the current results to those from 6 months ago, Julian showed remarkable improvement. Muscle strength increased by nearly 40%. Motor coordination by over 50%. I've never seen such numbers in a Duchenne patient. Sabrina's eyes widened. Then, Elliot was right? Dr. Preston nodded slightly, his tone softer now. He did something. That much is certain. I can't explain it medically. Perhaps a combination of physical therapy and psychological influence. Julian believed in Mr. Hayes, and sometimes belief itself creates real, measurable change. He paused before continuing. As for the muscle strain, honestly, that can happen in any intensive rehabilitation program, even under my supervision. According to the records, Mr. Hayes handled it properly. He stopped immediately, assessed the situation, and called for help. There were no professional mistakes. Sabrina felt as if a massive weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Then, Doctor, what should I do now? Dr. Preston smiled faintly. Bring him back. But this time, do it the right way. I'll work with Mr. Hayes, as a team. I'll bring the medical foundation, and he'll bring what we doctors often forget. Love and faith. That afternoon, Sabrina drove to Burbank, where Elliot lived. It was the first time she had truly stepped into his world. A modest apartment, 1 bedroom, a small living area that doubled as a kitchen, and a narrow bathroom. Not luxurious, but tidy and peaceful. On the walls hung dozens of Nora's drawings, bright suns, sunflowers, and one picture of a smiling boy in a wheelchair between 2 people. When Elliot opened the door, he froze. Mrs. Lennox? May I come in? He nodded and stepped aside. Nora sat on the floor, coloring quietly. She looked up, curious but silent. Hello, Nora, Sabrina said gently. Your drawings are beautiful. The little girl glanced at her father, waiting for his cue. Elliot gave a small nod. Nora hesitated, then picked up her newest drawing and handed it to Sabrina. It showed 3 figures, a man, a blonde girl, and a boy in a wheelchair, all smiling beneath a blue sky. That's Julian, Nora said softly, her first words to Sabrina. You know Julian? Dad told me, she said, a small smile appearing. He said Julian's really brave. Sabrina held the picture tight, her throat closing. Elliot hadn't just helped Julian. He had taught his daughter compassion, empathy, and the courage to see good in others. After Nora went to bed, Sabrina and Elliot sat across from each other on the old sofa. The room was quiet except for the steady ticking of a wall clock. Elliot, Sabrina began, her voice trembling, I came here to apologize. I treated you unfairly. I blamed you for my own fear. Elliot shook his head gently. You don't owe me an apology. I was responsible for Julian's injury. Intentional or not, it was my fault. No, Sabrina said firmly, her voice cracking. "Julian pushed himself too hard. He wanted to impress you. And honestly, Dr. Preston said the strain was a normal part of recovery." Elliot's eyes widened slightly. "Dr. Preston said that?" "He did," she nodded. "And he wants you to come back, officially this time. You'll work with the medical team, side by side. No more being treated like an outsider." For a moment, Elliot's eyes glimmered, a fragile mix of hope and disbelief. Then he looked down, his voice quieter. "After everything that happened, after what people said about me, why would you still want me back?" Sabrina didn't answer right away. She reached across the space between them, gently holding his hand. "Because my son loves you. Because Julian believes in you in a way he's never believed in anyone else. And because I've realized you gave my family something I could never buy. Hope." Her voice trembled. "I was wrong to look down on you. Wrong to let the world decide what was right. And most of all, wrong not to believe in the very thing my son believed in." Elliot sat in silence for a long time. Then he nodded slowly and pulled Sabrina into a brief, genuine embrace. Not romantic, but filled with gratitude and forgiveness. "I'll come back," he said softly. "Not for the title or the salary, but for Julian. Because that boy deserves the best chance we can give him." And in that moment, the two people who once lived in completely different worlds, a billionaire and a single father, finally shared something the same: the faith that love, given freely, can heal even the deepest wounds. Julian was discharged 1 week later. The moment he crossed the threshold of the mansion and saw Elliot waiting in the living room, his face lit up as if the sun had just risen inside the house. "Elliot!" he cried out, trying to run though his legs were still weak. Elliot stepped forward and pulled him into a tight hug. "I'm here, little man. I promised you. I'm not going anywhere." From that moment on, everything began to change. Dr. Preston kept his word. He set up an integrated care team for Julian, a model that blended medicine, therapy, and psychology. Dr. Patricia Morgan, child psychotherapist, helping Julian process emotions, overcome fear, and build confidence. Emily Ross, nutritionist designing a diet to support muscle regeneration and energy. Every week, the entire team sat together around the small table in Sabrina's office to review Julian's progress and adjust the therapy plan. For the first time, there was a perfect resonance between science and human kindness. The one who changed the most wasn't Julian. It was Sabrina Lennox. The woman who once spent 16 hours a day in meetings and multi-million-dollar deals began to scale back her schedule. Now, every afternoon at 5 o'clock, she left the office and drove straight home to be on time for her son's therapy session. At first, sitting on the floor in sweatpants to practice simple movements with her child felt awkward and self-conscious. The woman who used to live in stilettos and boardrooms now had to crouch down and place her hands on her son's trembling legs. Elliot guided her gently. "Mrs. Lennox, place your hands here. Feel Julian's muscles as he tries to lift his leg. You'll notice the difference between tension and relaxation." Sabrina followed, her hands shaking. And for the first time, she truly connected with her child, not through words, but through feeling. She could sense each muscle working, each careful breath, each small victory Julian earned. "You're doing so well, Julian," she whispered, her voice unsteady but warm. "I'm very proud of you." Julian looked up, eyes round and shining. "Mom, do you really think so?" Sabrina smiled, tears gathering. "I've always been proud of you, sweetheart. I just didn't know how to say it." One Saturday afternoon, Sabrina decided to do something special. She invited Elliot and Nora to the mansion for lunch. Nora stepped into the vast house with wide eyes. She spun once in the foyer, looked up at the high ceiling, and whispered, "It's like a castle from a fairy tale." Julian, being guided carefully down the stairs by Elliot, beamed when he saw her. He could now walk with assistance, something that had seemed impossible just 2 months earlier. "Hi, I've heard all about you from your dad." Nora glanced at Julian, then at the wheelchair sitting in the corner, curious. "Dad said you couldn't walk." "I couldn't before," Julian said proudly. "But now I'm learning again. Your dad is teaching me." "Dad's really good," Nora replied simply, then smiled and held out her hand. "Do you want to see my drawings?" The two children wandered into the garden together, leaving the grown-ups in the sunny kitchen. Sabrina and Elliot prepared lunch side by side. A simple, unfamiliar scene. Mrs. Lennox, who once directed hundreds of employees, now carefully chopped vegetables, while Elliot stirred tomato sauce for pasta. "It's been a long time since I've held a kitchen knife," Sabrina chuckled softly. "That's okay," Elliot smiled. "I get the feeling you're good at anything you set your mind to, even cooking." "You do know how to encourage people," she replied, gentler than she'd ever been. They chatted easily, about work, about Nora, about the children at St. Mary's. Sabrina spoke suddenly, eyes drifting to the garden where the kids sat drawing. "Thank you for coming. And thank you for bringing Nora. Julian needs a friend." "Nora needs that too," Elliot said warmly. "She doesn't have many at school. The other kids don't always understand her." "Julian is the same," Sabrina sighed. "Maybe the two of them can help each other." They fell quiet, watching through the window. Julian was trying to copy a drawing Nora had shown him, his lines clumsy, while Nora coached him patiently, without laughing or judging. "Nora has a special gift," Sabrina said. "She's very patient." "That's because she knows what it feels like when others aren't patient with her," Elliot replied slowly. "She's taught me more than I've ever taught her." Sabrina turned to look at him. In that moment, with the scent of tomato sauce filling the kitchen, she saw in Elliot not only a devoted father, but a man of patience, faith, and kindness. "You're a wonderful father, Elliot," she said softly. "I only hope that one day I can become the kind of mother you are, in your way." Elliot met her gaze, eyes gentle, and rested a light hand on her shoulder. A simple, sincere gesture. "You're already doing it, Mrs. Lennox," he said. "I see it every day." Their eyes held, quiet, understanding. Outside, the laughter of two children drifted in from the garden, like the soundtrack to a new beginning. A family forming not from blood, but from trust, courage, and unconditional love. The story of Sabrina, Julian, Elliot, and Nora is a gentle but profound reminder. Never judge people by their jobs or status. True worth isn't found in titles or money, but in the heart, in how we love, trust, and give. Miracles often come from the least expected places. Sometimes, the person who changes your entire life is the one you once overlooked. It's never too late to change. Sabrina was 42 when she finally learned to mother with her whole heart, not just with duty. Disability does not define a person. Julian and Nora prove that limits live in the mind, not in our abilities or our dreams. Love is the strongest medicine. No technology or wealth can replace genuine care and true compassion. If this story touched your heart, remember, each of us can be someone's Elliot, the one who dares to believe, to be patient, and to give hope when the world turns away. And perhaps, one day, we may also be a Sabrina, someone who learns to look deeper, beyond the surface, and recognize the true value of a human being. Never stop believing in the power of kindness. Never stop believing that people can change. And above all, never stop loving. If you believe in the power of kind stories, please subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone you love, because, who knows, you might be the miracle in someone else's story.